Slivers reacted without hesitation. All ships, begin light skipping. Harass and start pinging the armor. I want resonance frequencies now. Run off free, return to home. You have a new mission. Light skipping was a risky tactic born when rebels and enemies got annoyed being smashed by orbital artillery and dreadnought-class ships. It involved a vessel accelerating to near light speed for a split second before exiting the state in the computer-designed orientation to fire on the enemy and then skipping away, theoretically keeping you from ever being exposed to enemy fire. However, theory and application have a way of not quite working out the way the theorist likes. As the technique became used, vessels came up with ways to counter it by either shooting in all directions or predicting where the skipping vessel would be likely to drop out of the light speed acceleration, and saturating that area with fire. These are both things the Typhoon-class aerospace domination craft have been quickly retrofitted to be capable of doing. Simply jumping around and praying that a lucky shot wouldn't take them all out before they could wear down the metal wasn't in the cards, so Slivers had to adapt. She had 4 remaining patrol carriers and a single interceptor. The enemy had just 1 dreadnought, as the last of the escorts had either been destroyed or chased off. If she pulled her forces back, she might be able to alert the defense fleet about what had dropped into the system, but she would have to slow to 0 movement and charge capacitors for phase, something Captain Rochelle wouldn't hesitate to punish with a spinal cannon strike. So she couldn't run. How do you defeat a dreadnought? Trick question. You don't. Every dreadnought had either been scuttled when mission killed and swarmed by massed enemy craft, or hit with weapons specifically built to crack their armor. In every tactical example, a dreadnought showing up was shorthand for the cadet to write "cut and run" as their answer for what to do. But that wasn't how you defended your home. They also couldn't really run. Sure, they could try to jump far enough away at sublight speeds, but no matter how far they got, the dreadnought sensors would have a good chance of picking up their attempts to charge capacitors for phase and kill them. No, they would have to stand and fight and sell themselves dearly to this enemy. There were stories of the great synth of Slivers' home, the beasts whose tail blades split mountains and whose fangs pierced the crust of the planet. It was said they were killed by the first matriarchs. How? Every child asks. How does one so small kill one so large? Simple, the matriarch replied. You find a chink in its scales. And if there is no chink? The children asked. You make one. The cockpit of Interceptor 773 swung open, letting the 2 human pilots remove their helmets to breathe from slightly less recycled air for a moment, as the crew chief rushed up. Around them were empty berthings and silent cradles, the absence of the other 3 interceptors, a physical feeling. How close the pair had been to joining them stuck in the darkness of a shut-down simulator pod until the exam ended. Milk shivered. She wasn't claustrophobic, but even she didn't know how long she could stay like that until she went mad. The Irish lady took the time to wipe the sweat from her forehead before a message appeared on her WSO console. Cookie, cross-check this for me, but we're going to be mounting 12 ASMs? Thought our racks could only take 6. The WSO commented, accepting the automated loadout restock. Yeah, we should be able to do that. The racks are magnetic, so theoretically you can mount missiles on top of the wings by sheer magnetic force, but doing so will leave them fragile and cutting down on maneuverability. Why? Oh. He paused. I see what Slivers is doing. Milk nodded. Realised it when you said maneuverability will be cut down. The way you fly, that'd be more or less flying straight. Yeah. Cookie took a deep breath. Well, here's hoping we can get a nice little nap out of the lockdown. Agreed. I'm running on fumes already. God. 10 Gs puts a crick in your neck. The canopy began to descend, and Slivers' voice came in over the radio. Milk, Cookie, I think you figured out what I need you to do. Kamikaze, Milk replied, with a full Japanese accent. What? What does a divine... Never mind. We're going to slingshot you out. You need to get under their PD and drop all of your ASMs into as close to a single piece of armor as you can. We've already lost 2 out of our 4 ships who are caught light skipping, so once you pull that off, we'll pick you back up and hopefully be able to jump out. Cookie leaned over his seat and shook his head, no, at Milk, before crossing himself and muttering a prayer. We understand, Milk replied. Make sure your capacitors are charged for the jump, though. Once we finish our run, we'll be coming in hot, and I do not want you sticking around to get shot. "Will do, Ranulph. Good luck." The radio went dark. "Right, let's do this," Cookie said, finishing his prayer and readying for a crash launch. Normally, having an atmosphere-filled section of a ship exposed to hard vacuum is something that should be avoided at all costs, due to the fact that it is one of the easiest indications that something has gone terribly wrong. However, that is not the case when performing a crash launch. Normally, interceptors are either released from their cradles and fly out of their home vessel under their own power, or are moved toward a magnetic catapult that gives them initial burst of speed. These two procedures, however, have limits. The acceleration they create are limited by the systems themselves. Self-power can only rely on gravity drives due to being unable to fire the fusion torch inside the ship, and the magnetic catapult cannot be launched directly after a light skip due to static buildup around the hull. But there is still a need for the kind of extreme deployment velocities needed for crash deployments, so some mad bastard came up with an idea. First, the interceptor free floats above the deck, gravity engine prepared. Next, it extends in abo navigation flaps to maximum. And finally, the air in the launch tube is vented out of the craft, dragging the interceptor along with it. Once the interceptor is clear of the launch tube and hull, they gun the fusion torch to push them that much faster. This was a procedure that had been warned off by every single engineer, officer, experienced pilot and captain that has ever taught in the class, but every interceptor pilot has been trained in how to perform it, mostly so they can learn how to fly in adverse weather when air breathing. The main problem with this procedure is that, while yes, explosive decompression is less likely to damage the ship than triggering the fusion torch in the hull, or using a magnetic catapult in a high static environment, it is very uncontrollable. You need a steady hand and high skill to pull off the maneuver. Something Ryan Brooks, Cookie, Joseph Kennedy had in spades. It was no exaggeration to say that the human was the best cadet pilot in the academy, and it wasn't just from his prior experience with the F-18E. He just got how the interceptor was supposed to fly, even as other members of the flight fought with it or found themselves dragged around by the sheer power of the craft. But not Cookie. When he flew, it was like he could control every variable all at once, perfectly smooth and perfectly certain. There was no doubt and hesitation in how he pushed the craft to its limits, and never passed them. He rode that red line of power draw and airframe stress, like a practiced skateboarder grinding down a rail, never leaning too far to one side, never leaning too far to the other. But this was still a challenge. The sheer chaos of a crash deploy, combined with the excessive G's this maneuver would be putting on him, would test even the futuristic flight suit he wore and his naturally above-average G tolerance. As a string of lights began to count down in the sealed, armoured cockpit, Cookie began to breathe slowly, in and out. Anticipate the G's. He would be accelerating to Mach 20 in 25 seconds. 27 G's. The inertial dampeners would lower them down to 7 G's flat. Tense your muscles. Cookie clenched his legs up against the seat, letting the G-force suit aid in keeping his blood in his head, as the PRI-blended chip in his neck began to smartly adjust the suit's electronic laces. He'll be fine. He's done this before. The light flashed yellow. Cookie began to breathe deeply as he could hear Milk shifting behind him, crossing her arms into crash posture, while watching the projected flight path. They would be dropping out of light skip within knife-fighting range of the enemy dreadnought. They would then have to dump all of their ASMs below the dreadnought's point defense layer, and then hopefully make it out of that, to finally be caught by the final patrol cruiser coming out of light skip right in front of them. The light flashed orange. If they fuck this up, they will be dead. No second chances, no hesitation. If they release too low, they will be damaged by their own missiles. Too high, and the missiles will be destroyed by point defense, and so will the interceptor. If they didn't follow the flight path, then the ship coming to pick them up would miss, and crashing into it would be the least of their problems. And that was all if the dreadnought didn't shoot first. The light began to flash red. Milk took a deep breath in the back, as the pair began to hook breathe in sync. Old training for carrier launches and high-G maneuvers back from the USN coming to the forefront of their mind as the cradle fell away and numbers flashed on screen. 3. They braced, anticipating the shock. 2. They breathed, anticipating the punch. 1. They braced, anticipating the acceleration. 0. Launch. Slivers watched from the bridge as the flickering lights of near sea speed slowed down to a mere exceptionally fast velocity, as a warning flashed on the engineer's console indicating the crash launch. The success of this mission was no longer in the small patrol carrier's hands, for it did not matter if her ship survived. The package was away. "Bare our fangs!" she called out in her home language. "We shall not die without a bloody maw!" Musical hisses echoing around the room, resonating into an ancient battle cry. Seeing her bridge subtly turn to her for orders, she then switched to Trey Shill. "Bridge to all weapons! Target bearing bow and down, at range, close, has weapons trained on us. Kill with beams, missiles, and extreme prejudice." This would be her final order to the ship, as a tight burn beam hit the CIC, and the simulator went dark. Captain Yrrol stood on the bridge of her ship and, for a moment, asked herself why. The patrol carrier exited lightskip too close to the Typhoon-class dreadnought to properly maneuver and leverage superior speed in order to bring all weapons to bear against her, while she was limited to point defense and secondary beams. The dreadnought deployed a heavy enough gravity field that any attempt at a near-light ram would be turned aside instead of impacting, like what happens if one tries to ram a planetoid, and even then, the mutinous synth captain stopped instead of continuing forward. Patrol carriers didn't carry torpedoes, so there was no point in trying to... She had one interceptor left. "Sensors, search for enemy shuttlecraft near patrol carrier's exit. Bring that area up on screen," Rochelle ordered, her voice unhurried yet purposeful. As the sensor tech got to work, she watched the cameras appearing in front of her, searching for the faint flicker of an enemy craft trying to fly beneath her point defense weapons. She watched and narrowed her eyes before. There! She saw it. "Weapons! Target in Sector 40. Point defense, free fire," she called out. But it was too late. The interceptor was beneath their point defense envelope. And as Captain Yrrol watched approvingly, the sun rose off the starboard side of her ship 13 times in a row. Milk screamed in the back seat as the pair roared through hard vacuum, riding a nuclear rocket and dropping ordnance that would consider the nuclear city busters dropped on Japan a good start. The interceptor had survived the crash launch, barely. Only Cookie's skills as a pilot keeping them from being dashed against the launch tunnel. "We did it!" she screamed out to her pilot. "We fucking did it! All missiles away." Cookie snorted from the front seat, anti-glare coating making it a touch hard to see out of the cockpit as coolant sprayed into the vacuum from the massive hole in the outer pressure hull. There was a thud as one of Milk's cheerful fist pumps slammed into the armored cockpit before Cookie juked to the side, avoiding crashing into a point defense turret. "How are we looking on our exfil?" Milk looked back down. "Everything is lining up. We should be having our new home plate come out of skip." It was at that moment when everything went wrong. Sliver's carrier had lingered a second too long behind them. The power lines to the main weapons on the dreadnought hadn't been cut by Run-Off Free's missile strike, and Rochelle was willing to risk further damage to destroy the enemy. Behind the pair, in the flickering glow of plasma fire, 6 secondary beams impacted into the patrol carrier's frame, slicing through its hull, penetrating into its CIC, and ruining the engine compartment. One final barrage of missiles flew from the carrier as the engine core failed, but he'd be cut down by the Typhoon-class's still active point defense system. Cookie didn't panic. He went silent, ignoring the alarms blaring as he danced between pound defense turrets, aiming for that green box of home field safety. The timer in the corner of his eye began to count down time, until the friendly carrier would unskip and let them board. Free. He danced between towers, ECM and chaff and debris, fouling targeting software, forcing gunnery crews to move to manual control to hit the rocketing craft. 2. Milk took control of the nose-mounted laser weapon, spraying down anything that looked to them funny, making the enemy point defense group's jobs that much harder. They never saw one. As the interceptor pulled up, a barely aimed shot from a point defense beam set for high burn punched a hole through the interceptor's hull, screwing a simulated hit against a critical control system in the gravity drive. A cascading failure ran through the engine, forcing an uneven flicker of the controlling drive, causing the interceptor to suddenly bank and spin. Inside, the pair barely had half a second to react before everything went black as G-forces slammed their eyelids shut and a second simulated blast caught their cockpit. The mission was over. Ain't that a bitch? Captain Yrrol sat in an office room, accompanied by nothing but a set of omnislates and combat recordings. Most of the recordings had been already graded and slated for approval, dismissal, or commendation, but there were 3 she decided to take a further look at. First was the Gears Charge recording. While Captain Yrrol had never quite understood their religion, she would not deny they were clever and cunning engineers. The fact that the mechanical woman had more or less handled an entire engine room single-handedly was proof of that very matter. The bridge crew were never informed of mechanical faults that plagued the other ships in the patrol fleet, simply because, under Venture Force's loving touch, they were resolved fast enough to not matter. That alone had the Sevastopol captain putting in the informal dibs claim on her future postings. The fact she had begun contacting other ships and instructing them on how to handle their own problems. Rochelle was half inclined to kidnap the Gears child from the raging after-mission party, if she already didn't have a firm claim on the engineer. Chief engineer material, that one. Next was the Synth. While officially studying to be a weapons officer, Rochelle had earmarked her as potential full bridge crew material due to her handling of a dangerous situation. Her captain was a plant put in by the Academy to see how a crew would react when not given good leadership. Other ships were given proper or even enthusiastic captains. The Synth, Slivers, was given a terrified one. She had decided the best way to solve this problem was to stage a minor mutiny, wrap the foe captain up in her coils, and direct the battle in a way that the clay-hearted Yrrol had an appreciation for on a tactical level. It was a cavalcade of errors, but the foundations were there. Her watchkeeper needed a second to train up. And then, there were the pilots. Runoff 3, Interceptor number 773, a pair of strange aliens from a newly conquered world. The Imperium might dress up what they did as a liberation as much as they want, but the truth could not be denied. Conquest was conquest. The Imperium conquered Earth, like they conquered Sevastopol. But that wasn't what was up for debate. She saw them fly. She saw them draw her aces. She saw them win. There wasn't potential there because it had already been realized. This iron didn't need to be forged, merely provided a proper whetstone to keep the edge sharp. And that's how it always ended up, wasn't it? Half her glories and victories coming simply because she knew how to provide those whetstones, and the other half sending those she might even call friends into the grinder. But her pilots, these pilots, they were a different breed. Perhaps they could see the long odds and win when it counted. Maybe they could fight hard and for the people of the Imperium, because they sure as hell won't be fighting for the Empress. Perhaps. Rochelle rose from her desk and leaned against the window of her office. The sounds of celebration and pre-graduation drinking could be heard, even through the decently soundproofed wall. They deserved it, this celebration. After all, they forced her to call off the attack.